A superhuman is someone who is self-aware and who cultivates their natural self. Each one of us are gifted with our unique observations, inclinations, and curiosities in life. The goal of the Superhuman Project is to help professionals become the best version of themselves and realize their full potential, to honor our natural selves. In each episode, I invite professionals at the top of their field and ask them questions about their quest for self-awareness. What makes them successful and how do they stay at the top of their game? Ultimately, it is about living a life we always wanted to live and not letting other people define it for us. Making sure we fulfill the potential that God has given us and we are living our best selves. Let's jump in. So today we have Adam Rodell from Microsoft Corporation. He is my mentor, my friend, and a colleague. And I'm very excited. And thank you, Adam, for giving us time today. I'm very excited. I look forward to knowing who Adam Rodell is. He is the managing director of Industry Digital Strategy at Microsoft. And he has been with Microsoft for 15 years, give and take. And he has done all kinds of different roles. The surprising fact for me while preparing for this interview is that Adam is a major in philosophy, and he talks about serendipity or synchronicity, which is, and I really want to know more about that because I see in his profile, he talks to students or folks who are doing their career planning. He gives them tips about finding strengths and pursuing non-traditional careers. So definitely would like to know more from Adam. So Adam, welcome, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Emil. It's so great to be here. So as Emil points out, I'm Adam Rodell. I work for Microsoft, as he was speaking about in his preamble and address, that I lead our industry digital strategy within our worldwide commercial business, specifically for a role that's known as industry digital strategists. So these are men and women that work with our largest customers on business transformation through digital enablement and really focusing on, from what we would term a multi-horizon point of view, and horizon 3 being highly disruptive in market, what those businesses can do to employ technology in order to be transformational in their businesses and in their respective markets. And you think about how important that is in the time of COVID, in particular, for essential and non-essential businesses that have effectively had to completely rethink themselves and their businesses in this time. And so we do a lot of pretty important things with a lot of very important customers.
So thanks for that introduction, Adam. So let's jump into, I would like to know more about the different roles that you have done. I know that you come from a financial services background. You have also been in media and entertainment background. So what is common across these different variety of roles and responsibilities that you have had? Because I know that a lot of people, they are probably stuck in one role, one career, one industry, and it feels like you are a role model in terms of you have touched many industries, you have a very wide experience. So what's your secret, and what's your advice for people who want to pursue a career like yours?
Yeah, it's a great question. It starts with how I was raised and even within my own family. So I come from a family where my father was a mechanical engineer and had a career in the oil and gas industry, and ultimately ended up being a small business owner of his own interior decoration and design firm, along with my mother. My brother has a degree and career start in marine biology, and now is one of the world's top martial artists in a very specific area. And so it's sort of, that's the foundation of it. And relative to how I think about my career is that I think of it in a very Nietzschean type of way, which means being in a constant state of becoming or never truly getting to the finish line. And so that enables me to think about what career competencies and experiences that I would truly want. And you mentioned at the outset about, getting involved with the University of Massachusetts. one of the things they asked me to come back and speak about was, how does a guy that has a sociology degree and a chemistry degree and a history degree at UMass and a master's in intellectual history end up leading a business for a large technology firm? Our students want to know, how do you even get to that career path? And so I would tell you at the outset that it starts, as I said, and really being a student of the game and really always seeking to acquire new skills and experiences.
Wow. Let's unpack that. So seeking new skills and experiences. And you, I always say you are an inspiration. So, and a lot of people, they, despite their ambition or aspiration to acquire new skills and experience, they are restricted because of the time constraints or family priorities and things like that. So my question to you is more about, one, how would you find time in tinkering or experimenting to acquire new skills? And two, if you have time, how do you know which skills to acquire?
Yeah, it's a good question. The second part's the harder part to really answer, which is what skills to acquire. I think what's important is that, number one, you have to have the passion about anything that you want to go out and pursue. Secondly is, thinking about your career in 1, 3, 5, 10-year segments, 15-year segments is important, right? And it starts with this really old phrase that I've always sort of really tucked inside of my head, which is, just realize an overnight success takes about 10 to 15 years. And so you're looking at a person who is in technology, who never had a business course and never had a technology course in his life. And so way back when I started my career path and journey, I said in 10 to 15 years, I want to be in technology. So what do I need to do now in order to acquire their skills to be there? The second half of your question is really about time management and how you think about your life. And so in my own life, I think about the different roles that I have, right? As a professional, as a father, as a coach to my children, as a coach to other people, like at the University of Massachusetts and Drew and other places that I've been. And how do I give back? And then how do I learn from that? And does it fit with, once again, where I want to go in that 1, 3, 5, 10, and 15-year timeline? And if you can do those two things well and balance those things, you can ultimately achieve the things that you want to over a long period of time.
That's great. So what I'm hearing is, which I totally believe in, is, manifesting things, or power of manifestation and visualizing. So you said your overnight success in technology took 10 to 15 years or whatever time it took. But I would like to understand more in terms of stories, so that the people who are listening, they get a sense of, because it definitely requires patience, and especially when you are an outsider. Because I have a similar story like yours. I'm a mechanical engineer. I do not have a technology specific background, but I learned everything on the job. And I am a business major. So maybe, but in your case, you said chemistry, history, and sociology, philosophy. So they are like all non-traditional subjects. And
yes,
But definitely they have importance in the way technology companies, create products, how customers are using. So all of that, I would say the subjects definitely are important. But when you started as an outsider, when you started thinking, okay, one day I want to be in a technology company, what kind of small baby steps you took?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So I would have to take you back and do a little storytelling here. And what I would tell you is, when I was joining business, when I decided I wanted to do that, I began to do my own research. And I understood from back in those times, 25 years ago, that information technology companies were going to be the wave of the future of the 21st century, meaning the big companies like Microsoft and other companies would dominate that. And I began to look for companies that were thinking about that, really trending toward that in their businesses. And I came across one of those companies at the time was AT&T. AT&T at the time, if you remember, had three entities. There was a trivestiture that they did in the late 90s. But before that, they were AT&T. What is AT&T today? They were Lucent Technologies, and they were NCR systems. And NCR, as you know, had Teradata underneath it. So large data warehousing and business analytics. And so that was the technology end of the company, the sort of Lucent, Bell Labs, NCR. And so I knew I wanted to be at a place like that. And yet I had no technology skills and I had no business skills, right? And so I worked with different recruiters. I went out and showed some of the grit. Another thing about me is I've been an athlete my whole life. And so a lot of the sort of attributes you think about from an athletic point of view, having strong grit and passion, as I mentioned earlier, being able to show that you have teamwork, being able to show that you have the ability to go out and be competitive and run faster than the next person. I did a lot of that groundwork. I met with many different people that worked for AT&T and inquired about working for them. And they said, you can't work for me. You have no experience. And so the long and the short of it is I eventually found my way into a sub company of the AT&T overall corporate structure that focused on all of the consumables that came out of NCR equipment. So think about NCR's primary businesses: ATMs, paper roll receipts. When you do those self-checkout at the grocery store or Home Depot, those were primarily or were all NCR systems back in the day. Labeling systems at places like Dell Electronics and other places. And so I effectively started my business there and learned the business from the ground up and eventually worked my way. And the recruiter said to me, if you're good enough and you can, once again, think about 1, 3, 5 years out, you'll find a way to get into the technology division of AT&T, which is known as Teradata. And that's effectively what I did over that period of time.
Wow, this is so inspiring. It gives, in my mind, I was picturizing like you have seen these movies of sales guys or even successful people who start in the mailroom and then they make their way up to the top floor. So it looks like that's how you have done it. And for people who are listening, I was taking notes here. I think there are a lot of things to learn. One is, like you talk about the qualities of an athlete, the grit, passion, teamwork. I think those are the skills which are like transformational or transferable skills from one industry to another, from one business function to another. So that goes a long way. So all the athletes who are thinking of breaking into industries for which they do not have a major in their educational background, they should not lose hope. And definitely your athletic experience counts. And then in terms of, you mentioned that you were talking to anybody and everybody in terms of recruiters. So that is another thing which I always want to highlight, that it is very important to try. It is very important to talk to people. I think if you start giving out interviews, you might fail in 99 interviews. And then the 100th interview, you will walk like them, you will talk like them. So that's how you learn the language of the industry. So this is very inspiring. And you talk about NCR. So you and I have a similarity in NCR. I also worked for Teradata back in the day. And for people who do not know NCR, so it's a National Capital Register. So I think till now we see those NCR cash registers in grocery markets and other places. So they are very popular with that. So I love it, the way you found your way into the technology industry. So you talk about something. I'm moving on and fast forwarding now. I took you to your past. Now I'll move to the future. So let's say Adam Rodell is starting now, and then you are planning to break into a new industry. You're starting your career today. You are the Adam from the college. And then you said you did some research on the wave of future. So I'm trying to understand from you, what is the new wave of future? What are the new careers or new skills or job functions that excite you or you see as the future of work?
Wow. Okay. That's a slightly different direction I thought we were going to go. I thought you were going to ask me where I wanted to.
Yeah. It's actually, I want to know from you where you want to know, where you want to go, because I'm trying to see the world through your eyes.
Yeah. Well, No, I really appreciate that. And I love this whole conversation because as I was reading, some of what you had sent to me prior to this conversation, it was about this notion of having multiple careers within your career lifespan. And the average, I think, is around three that the average person has. And I'll tell you that when I first, had my educational experience, I never would have thought or told you that leading a technology business is where I aspirationally wanted to be. What I wanted to be was a college professor and lacrosse coach. I played lacrosse as an athlete in high school and college. And so and I'm a big believer in always giving back to the community, whether that community be where you live at home, whether that be within your professional background or your personal background, is what are you doing to give back? And so being a teacher for me and helping teach others, even what I do today, is very important to me. And so where I wanted to go originally was to be a professor. Where I want to go is, after my career in technology, is to go back and do that. And specifically, right, UMass has a master's program now of computational sciences, and how to utilize behavioral sciences, utilizing computational science and data to really go drive new, interesting, industries, and also education for those types of people. So I really would love to get back involved in that, because I think, as you know, the last generation, like you and I, people that have come through for technology companies, there is this wave of the future, as you said. And when we look towards technology and digital enablement, it will continue to ratchet up in terms of the importance of that to society in a variety of different ways. And so I think it's very important that we teach, you and I and others that have had this experience, teach the future generation of women and men that will come up to think in this type of way, and to think that you can be in a constant state of becoming, and you can always learn new skills and always have new experiences, so long as you keep yourself fixated on what is that North Star to you 5, 10, 15 years out. You will get there. Once again, assuming, as you pointed out, that you will fail along the way. And that's an important part of growth. And that ultimately you will help, reach that. And then in your career, how do you be transformational to yourself and others in that? And that's really what I'm focused on. And my next career is maybe going back to my roots and really getting back to helping teach and inform others of, the path that they would like to explore.
I love it. It feels like, you are reading my mind, because I also sometimes I think probably that I want to go and teach full time. So somehow, we are thinking alike here. So
we'll do it together.
Yes. So let's talk more about the future of work, and especially folks who are maybe folks who started their college just maybe now or last year, and they were not able to live the college life as they expected it to be. And now they are getting used to the new world of virtual. And especially I know a lot of students, they are now doing virtual internships. So for them, work is very different, or maybe it's very different from what they heard from their teachers or their parents. And most likely in every day I'm reading in newspapers, they are debating if the offices would open, what hybrid workplace, and different kinds of things. So what's your advice to a student or somebody who is interning and he's preparing himself for the future workplace? So what do you think? What should he focus on, or what kind of skills or activities he should get himself involved in?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So what I would say, and I think is probably quite apparent, particularly given what's occurred in the world in the last year and a half with COVID, is that technology is not just here to stay, but that it's accelerating as a fundamental foundation of most industries, right? And so there's this notion of digital transformation that is, once again, accelerating and becomes ingrained into everything that we do. And so there's a few things in that. One is, from a career perspective, is not to shy from those things, is to really run towards it and look for how you acquire skill and competencies that will augment whatever your experience is. So as an example, I said I maybe want to go back and be a teacher. Being a teacher in 2021 looks a heck of a lot different than it was being a teacher even in 2010.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Think about just in terms of the skills that a teacher has to have. My daughters this year went to hybrid school, which meant every other day, half of the class was sitting in the classroom and half of the class is sitting online. And the teacher's sitting like you and I are right now, half online and half in the classroom. And so the type of skills that takes from an oratory perspective, from a lesson planning perspective, from a way that you engage an audience like you and I are doing here, right, virtually versus in person is quite different. And now you have to be able to do that in a hybrid manner, which means you have to have the skills and competencies to really be able to, from a human point of view, because I want to always remember people, processes, and systems, and we're human beings and people, that you have to be able to engage and be clear, concise, and compelling in what you do and what you say in a medium that is now immersive in nature. And so at the very outset, you also said that one of the things that intrigued you about my profile was this notion of synchronicity and synergy. And that's what I mean by that in one dimension, is that how do you create the synchronicity in your own career and your own skills and competencies to be ready for a world that is very quickly and rapidly transforming to the point at which technology becomes, immersive once again in everything that we do. And so to harness that and think about that relative to your career is also extremely important.
Cool. That's you so many things you gave me here. I don't know which thread to pick and take it further. But before we move on, one key thing I want you to touch upon for people who are probably new to the word digital transformation. So can you explain what is digital transformation?
Yeah, it's a word, it's a phrase that's used quite often. And so the way I think about it is really an evolution. And it really could be on any level, but let's talk about it in a corporate context, right? So, and I'll be very anecdotal about it, right? I want you to think about I use a very specific example. By the way, it's not a Microsoft example, but think about what Uber did to transportation. Just period, stop, just hold silence and think about that. Think about how they disintermediated the whole notion of how we thought about taking a taxi, how they completely changed the business model through a digital transformation, right? You use the Uber app. Who doesn't today think about opening up their Uber app, calling an Uber that comes to the direct point and takes you to a direct point? 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been thought about. That is a perfect example of how I would define digital transformation. It's being able to utilize technology to reassess and rethink everything that you do, right, at its core. And what new heights could you reach? How could you unlock a new revenue stream? Once again, I'm using a corporate example. How could you be disruptive as Uber was in the market? Once again, whether you're an essential or a non-essential business, to utilize technology in those new and unique ways. And that's truly what digital transformation is at its core.
Perfect. That's a great example. In fact, I am personally a big fan of digital transformation, being a mechanical engineer. My definition for my customers and folks that ask me about it, it's all about digitizing any business, the way we work, the way we live. So if we look at it, everything we have on our cell phones. So all kind of, if it's about our kids, we have applications that can track our kids now. So it's about tracking all steps in a business and trying to figure out if that data can help us make money. Like Adam gave an example of Uber. We have examples, so many examples around us, like Starbucks. We use our app and the order is ready before we go there. We have so many other examples, especially in the pandemic era, where we just use our applications and we get food or grocery delivered at our doorstep. So that's how a lot of companies are trying to take advantage of digitizing their business and finding more revenue streams from it. So cool.
Yeah.
So let's...
Can I give you one more simple example for our audience? I just came across libraries. Think about what the internet did to libraries. There's no more books. Yeah. No one goes to the library and pulls books out. Of course, not en masse anymore, right? or what Amazon did to Barnes and Noble in the bookstore, digital transformation, right? So digitization of books in the Library of Congress. People now, you and I could sit here right at our desktop and go to the Library of Congress today. Yesterday, it would have taken us taking a train down to Washington, D.C. and walking through the doors. And that's a perfect example of digital transformation as well in a non-corporate situation.
Yeah. So moving back to the topic we were talking about, you said people, process, systems, and you talked about people, especially in a virtual world. And now, since the world is opening, especially in US, offices are opening. What's your take on that? What do you think about the hybrid workplace or working remotely? What are the pros and cons according to you?
Yeah. Well, so you're speaking to a person who, prior to the pandemic, right up until the pandemic, traveled probably about 100 to 150,000 air miles per year for my job. And in the last year and a half, I haven't not been on a plane. And so that's a pretty abrupt career shift. And we've all experienced that to some degree, most of us to pretty much that degree as well. And so as we come out of this, we can rethink a lot of this. So one thing I'll tell you from sort of Satya, our CEO's point of view, and how we think about it is, Adam Rodell and the rest of the company is doing a heck of a lot of traveling on airplanes. That puts a heck of a lot of pollution into the atmosphere. One of the things we learned in the pandemic is the sky's cleared, right? With no one polluting, we could treat the world better. So back to this notion of people, processes, and systems. Well, we've learned a lot about the processes and the systems, like airplanes and everything. And we've learned about how technology, we can harness it now in new and unique ways. We have to rethink the workplace. And so as I think about going back to work, when I say going back to work, I mean going back to that previous schedule. I don't believe I'll travel as much as I did in the way that I did. Now, there's a flip side to that. You could say, wow, you could save all this money and you could save the earth and you could not travel anywhere. And I did mention people, processes, and systems, and I believe that people are the most important piece of that. And human beings need to touch each other in terms of connection in a room. And I would tell you that regardless of all the tools and platforms that we can utilize, that doing a whiteboard session in person with people in a room generally generates higher value in terms of ideation than doing it online. That's just, at least to me, and I believe there's sort of data that supports this, that's important. And so we do have to think about, what does that hybrid model look like? How often should we be traveling? What are the needs of that? And then how does that affect all of these other elements? As I mentioned, one of them, as the example I gave, is being the environment, right? And how do we become more responsible citizens of the world, to each other, to the businesses that we lead, and to the planet, in terms of how we think about that? And in my own career, I think about that a lot. I'm thinking right now about, what do I go back to when in September of this year, it's anticipated that Microsoft reopens its offices. Will I go back as often? The answer is probably no, because I do think about all those other elements. And I do think about time management and the time factor of having the opportunity to be here and how much more I can get done electronically. And yet I cannot go connect with a senior leader of a customer in a real human way unless I'm sitting there with them. I can't connect with those students at the University of Massachusetts if I do not get up there at least once a year to shake some hands and show them I'm actually a real human being that's there and have all the same emotions and anxieties and challenges that any human would have in dealing with what they do in life every day. So that's kind of where I am in my own personal journey and thinking about a return to normalcy, or sort of what's next relative to the workplace and to my personal life as well.
I like it. So let's move on and look at time management and your calendar management skills. So I think that pandemic has really given us a chance to really reassess how we spend our time. And I think, and this is in terms of email, the purpose email was invented for. I personally think that we have over abused email for that purpose. And I realized that the email has become a conversation method versus more a communication method. because of which we get so much email traffic. And sometimes it is all about just responding to emails that eats all the time. And looking at calendar, giving access to your calendar to people, it becomes like, you let people block your time, take away your time without realizing what would be your role in a particular meeting or not. So I want to know from you, how do you use this tool of email, calendar, and I know Skype and all other tools that are there, and stay most efficient with your time?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and something as you mentioned, we're all challenged with every day. When I first got to Microsoft, I added up, like I joined here in the solutions team unit way back when, and I was a specialist around data and artificial intelligence. And I added up, so I was called upon by many different account executives for my specialization to come in and talk to that customer about opportunities for digital transformation. And when I added up what I was being asked to do, like, hey, I need you for a few hours here, and another account executive was, hey, I need you for a few hours over here. It was 150 hours a week. So it was literally like, I think there's only 150 some odd 7 hours of whatever it is in a full week. It's like I had no time to sleep at all. So first and foremost, from a time management perspective, it's a realization in your career that you can never do everything at all. In fact, you probably can get to about 20% of what you're being asked to do in life. Okay, remember, there's different roles that I envision myself playing, as I mentioned earlier: professional, father, husband, coach, and the like. And I can only do 15 or 20% of things. So what's the right set of things to do? That's first where you have to anchor yourself, is to say, across the roles that you have, and when you add up everything you're being asked to do, what are the three most important things out of the 20 things you're being asked to do that you can do right now? Focus on you and the process. That's it. And remember, keep your North Star 1, 3, 5, 10, 15 years out, where you want to go, because that's going to help guide you as to, out of those 20 things, what do you need to focus on? Secondly, you mentioned communication platforms, okay? And you specifically talked about email. So anyone who works with me closely now knows that I don't focus a lot on email. I spend very little time in email at all. People will say to me, did you see the email I sent? And I say, no. I say, they say, I don't understand. What do you mean? I say, well, was it important? Well, to your point, there's varying degrees of that. Say, if there's anything you need to let me know, so pick your medium. If it's going to be email, that's okay. If you're going to use Outlook as an example of how you want to communicate, then that's it. But there's this notion of eyeball time, back to this notion of 150 hours, plus in a week, but really 40 to 50 cycles or hours we can really work in front of a screen, let's say. And then you have time on telephone and other things like that. So what are you going to use your eyeball time for? Are you going to be in email? Or are you going to be in Skype? Are you going to be in Microsoft Teams? Are you going to be in Zoom? Where are you going to live your life? For me, I live in Microsoft Teams because of persistent chat that we have there. And I ask people to communicate with me in that way. And the secondary form I utilize is, if you really need me, pick up the phone and call me. Sounds very 20th century. However, it still works really well. And so you have to pick your medium, and then you have to pick what's important to you, right? Those two things in balance, that cascade down off of the roles that you play, that cascade down off of the 1, 3, 5, 10, 15-year North Stars, will keep you in good alignment from a time management perspective. And we're always all challenged to find more time and more ways to do those things. In my career, in my life, that's what's always been very successful for me.
I love it. This is so good. So eyeball time, this is something new that I'm going to add it to my vocabulary. And I think it's, it's very important that, everyone is craving for our attention, or every email, every task is craving for our attention. So we have to protect our attention and our time. So it's very important that we keep distractions away and just pick that, like you say, top 3 tasks for the day and just do them in a serial manner without any distractions. So that's very good advice. So moving on, since the podcast is called the Superhuman Project, and the definition of a superhuman, I say all of us are superhumans, and my definition of a superhuman is someone who knows themselves. They know themselves, they know their strengths, they know what conditions, what situation they will play their best. So, and it's a process. It's sometimes, I would say, it's a lifetime journey. We have to keep exploring our boundaries and keep on reinventing ourselves. How do you reinvent yourself? How do you keep pushing boundaries?
Yeah. So, that's a very important set of points that you make there. And as I mentioned, I'm first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, I'm sort of Nietzschean, which means I always want to be a student. There's always something that I want to learn. But specifically, you're asking sort of like, how do you continually reinvent yourself? And so, what I would tell you is that most people, that's probably an incorrect statement. It's a very natural human condition to want to feel safe, to go to a place where we have a high level of confidence that we can be successful in doing that very perhaps even menial task. And that there's a very innate and natural human inhibition to want to take risk, right? Because risk can have reward, or it could be calamitous. Like if you're talking about something like spelunking, like cliff diving or anything like that. And so what I would say is, in order to continually reinvent yourself, you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to do things that you don't like to do well, or that you don't do well, and seek out new skills that you can build. So I'll give you a very sort of maybe anecdotal, but specific example relative to me. I'm a very poor public speaker. Yet I'm doing.
You are not.
No, okay. You are not. Good. All right. So what I would tell you is thank you, and I'm improving, right? And so I used to have a tremendous amount of anxiety going on stage in front of people, or even doing a video broadcast like this. Like I would get tight and feel tight-throated, and so that was risk in me forever wanting to step up in my career and have a role where I might have to get up in front of a room full of people and evangelize something perhaps, or talk about a particular topic that I may not know as much about, right? And so getting into that uncomfort zone is incredibly important in terms of reinventing yourself. In fact, I would argue that if you're listening to this, that you should seek out things that you're not good at and go explore which of those things you may be somewhat passionate about, but you're scared of, and go do it. Right? Because you can end up in a better place. I'm not a perfect public speaker. There are many things I do wrong. And trust me, I'm far from being good at this yet. And yet I've come so far in my journey. Remember, Nietzschean approach. Never reach the finish line. And so I want to continue to hone those skills over the rest of my career. Even when I do become, remember, a college professor again, I want to be able to ensure that in that hybrid environment that we talked about, that I can be compelling, that I can be charismatic, that I can, because ultimately that's how people and humans learn, is from people that they engage with deeply. And so reinventing myself for me at this moment is about how do I really do those things, and how do I seek out career experiences and life experiences, once again, that are out of my comfort zone so I can learn, because that's ultimately how we grow and learn.
Yeah. One thing which I definitely want to point out, since my kids don't believe this, that I'm from the age when there was no internet, there was no cell phone. Back in India, it was just a usual landline, and we always dreamt of the world. So my access to the world was newspaper. And even back in India, there are not many public libraries. There is no private library. So my access to, I was limited by my access to the information was that daily newspaper that I used to get.
Yeah.
Fast forward today, the world has changed so much that whatever I can think of, I want to become a heart surgeon. I can go to YouTube and start looking at videos. I can probably in spending maybe few days a week, I can get a sense of what a heart surgeon does. What's a day in the life of a heart surgeon? I'm not saying that you can become a heart surgeon by watching YouTube, but what I mean to say is that you can get a sense of if that is something which is meant for you or not. Like Adam, you were saying, for learning or for trying out, this is the best age to be in. We have data available everywhere on our devices. We can just go in, read, or whatever medium we like. We can read, we can watch, we can listen, and we can get up to speed on a particular topic and figure out if that is something which is meant for us or not.
Yeah.
So that's what I was arriving at. Now, going back to the topic of learning, what are your favorite books, or some book that impacted you a lot in a positive way that you like to refer to all the time?
Oh gosh, there are so many. I hate to, sometimes maybe talk about our competition, but they're a really bright company as well. But there's a book that's called The Search that came out probably about 10 or 15 years ago about what Sergey Brin and the folks at Google did, right? In terms of how they rethought search and what that's meant to the world. Because you just even brought that up in your YouTube example. I was just thinking as you were talking about that, the differences of the way we do primary research today versus the way we would have done primary research 30 years ago, where primary research meant you had to get in a car and drive somewhere to go find the reference materials to go do the research. Whereas today, to your point, it's to your fingertips. There's just so many. And then, from a biographical perspective, I've read a lot about, what Abraham Lincoln has done, what Martin Luther King has done, influential people, primarily in, the US and European and Asian theaters. And then just to be completely transparent, I also like, quicker reads like Sun Tzu's Art of War and more things that are, really foundational, right? In terms of how I think about myself, maybe from a dynamics point of view internally, maybe like, Myers-Briggs related or what have you, but things from a business and psychology perspective that really help. Recently, I've gotten quite involved with mindfulness training. And so really thinking about what is mindfulness, calm and confidence, and really, purity of thought. And so there's a lot of great books in that area. The Rise of Superman being one of them is an example that I've read rather recently that really keeps you focused on what's important and how do you develop yourself. And so much of how we develop ourselves is EQ related, meaning it's a function of your emotional quotient, right? Of the environment around you, of your emotions, of your bodily sensations, and how do you keep in the moment, right? As you and I are having right now, and not let your brain sort of like float away into other things that can keep us distracted. And so I spend a lot of time in determining ways in which I can help sharpen that focus, because once again, that helps me in all the areas we're talking about.
Yeah, this is so great to talk about mindfulness. I think earlier when you were mentioning about eyeball time and attention, I think we are distracted by information devices so much to the extent that we are not in the moment anytime. And that's very important. And I think that's one thing which I would tell everybody, that if you want to enjoy life, you need to be in the moment instead of being somewhere in future or in the past. So definitely this is very helpful. And I believe we might have to do a part 2 of it someday, because given that you have shared so much. And so for folks who are listening to this, and in case they want to reach out to you, how should they do that? Where should they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the medium of LinkedIn is a great place for us to reach out and communicate with each other. So please feel free to do that. Send me a message there. You could also reach me at my formal address, which is just my first dot, my last at Microsoft. So it's Adam, ADAM Rodell, RODELL at Microsoft.com. And I spend a lot of my time, outside of doing all those other roles I talk about, as being a mentor to everyone and anyone that wants to engage with me, because I learn from that as well. Even in our conversation today, we've been good friends and colleagues for a long time. There's a lot I can learn, even from, the youngest of students up to, career executives that are more senior than me in nature in terms of those experiences and skill sets. And so engaging in dialogue on a human level, as I said, is the most important thing. So please reach out. I'd be more than happy to share my time with anyone that's interested in doing so to the extent that I can. and still focus on all those things we've talked about today that are important to us.
Cool. I really appreciate your time, Adam. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Emil. Looking forward perhaps to part 2, and look forward to talking soon.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to the full episode, go to our YouTube channel or Apple iTunes or Spotify. Go there and search for the Superhuman Project and you will find us. In case you would like to contact us, please follow our LinkedIn page and send us a direct message. Until then, thank you.